This is the Inside Connection podcast powered by MediConnect. I'm Sean Horn. He is Lance O'Brien. And generally speaking, people really tune in and plug in and pay attention in the fourth quarter year when it relates to Medicare because there's a lot of movement. That's when people can make a lot of changes. But here we are, beginning of April. There's some big news dropping that we do have to cover because it's going to impact all of our listeners. Lance, tell us a little bit about what's going on right now related to Medicare.
Yeah, so this week, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, commonly known as CMS, they released their final notice. Okay. Now, CMS is the governing body for Medicare, and basically what they do is they determine how finances are distributed, right, and rules are administered through the Department of Medicare and Medicaid, right? So they have this final notice, comes out once a year, and it really dictates how the plans work for the rest of the year. So let's talk about why this is important. Medicare, Medicaid, pretty big part of our federal budget, correct?
Number 2 overall behind the defense budget, right? So
yes,
there's a lot of money flowing through these programs, unfortunately. And of course, you get the lobbyists involved. They usually come in right around, February, once the initial ruling happens, which we learned about a few weeks back. Medicare kind of lets the market know, hey, here's what we're thinking. And then here come the lobbyists. They go marching into Washington saying, no, this is what we need for this, that. They try to get more money thrown in their direction. The government then takes that information, of course. They, negotiate amongst themselves. And then back out comes this final ruling, which again, this is what is going to be how 2024 really is laid out in front of us. And there's some pretty big changes, I think, as it relates to, especially as of late, because in the last couple of years, the increase of spend when it comes to Medicare has been pretty substantial, whereas this year, it's not as big.
Yeah, I look at this as the golden age of Medicare, if you will, right?
Okay.
Not only from the standpoint of people getting onto Medicare, we talk about it many times, 10,000, 11,000 people a day turning 65, all the baby boomers, right? And then we saw the income of the Medicare Advantage plans, Part D, back in 2006. And there was kind of a feeling out period when it came to that. And then really over the last, I would say 5 to 7 years, they've really begun to hone in on these. So there's been a lot of money being funneled from Medicare to the Advantage plans, the private insurance companies that offer this additional insurance, right? Because from Medicare standpoint, they're happy to have the insurance go to the private insurance companies from a liability standpoint, right?
Big time, yeah.
Yeah, so it's really huge, right? So what is happening now is what we're seeing with the advance notice. It was a little bit over 1% in February. The lobbyists got together. They got it up over a little over 3%, but it still falls short of last year where there was an influx of over 8% increase. Just to give you real dollars on this, because I was on the call earlier this week with CMS as they were unpacking this 3.3% increase is still about $14 billion. I mean, it's a lot of money, more than I got in my pockets, right? So it's a lot of money.
I'm looking in the couch cushion here, see if I could find some,
Yeah, so it's a lot of money to literally anyone. So, Sean, let's talk about how we begin to see this kind of impact the companies and then ultimately the consumer.
All right, so here we are in April where the notice is finally received by everybody in the insurance world. Okay, so what's going to happen between now and about July, maybe beginning of August, is the insurance companies are going to go and try to work their plans out in a way that makes fiscal sense to them, as well as will get approved by Medicare. So there's a 2-part process there.
Yeah. Most people don't realize they have to, the companies have to submit a bid, right?
They do. And there's been times in the past where a bid does not work in the favor of the insurance company. And actually, there's been situations where sanctions were actually released against these companies for trying to take too much advantage of. So, the insurance companies have, freedom of profitability, of course, and they have ways in which they want to, get their benefits together to be as attractive to the consumers as possible. But it also has to meet the eye of the government when it comes to what they will allow. So between now and July, or right around that ballpark, they're busy working internally to see how they can stretch these dollars to offer very competitive plans still because, especially here in Southwestern Pennsylvania, we're talking about a very competitive market.
Absolutely.
So we have that working in our favor, for our listening and watching audience today, because even with the increase not being as much as some of these insurance companies wanted, because you were talking earlier this week about, they were hopeful for like a 4% increase.
Yeah.
So we fell a little short of that, right?
Yes.
So if that's going to be the case, what are they going to cut, if you will, to still keep their programs, very competitive, but also they got to maintain their profitability, of course, which is where the government is kind of, I think they're trying to step in a little bit.
Yeah, and that's the thing. This final notice is an indicator. It's not an absolute, if you will. It's an indicator on how things could go. So last year we had almost this 8.5% increase,
Yep.
right? We saw Part B go down in cost. We
Now, why
saw,
did that happen?
well, that happened because the Alzheimer drug and everything related to, they thought there was going to be spending on a drug that didn't happen. And then we see that come down, right? So that I wouldn't say was directly tied to the final notice, right? But ultimately, with that coming down, it was a positive year for consumers. They saw the increase or the influx of money into the Medicare programs. So then we saw a decrease in premiums. We saw expansion of benefits, which is what we've been seeing really over the last 5 years, where now, if we've seen with this great infusion of money, all of this more, now it's not a negative this year, right? But it's a lot less than it was. So
It's kind of like what I face at home with my daughters when I give them a little bit of money to do the dishes, right? I go and ask them to do it again a couple days later, and they're like, wait a minute, why is it less than it was last time I did it? It's the same type of concept, unfortunately, where, look, as you were breaking down last year, heading into this year, we had an 8.5% increase, which, as you noted correctly, Part B premium came down. First time in decades that took place, right? The spend for Medicare obviously went way up. Inflation caused a little bit of, concern, of course, but at the grand scheme of things, this was a net positive for the consumers. So now that we're peeling it back from 8.5 to 3.32% exactly, now we're going to see how these plans can get creative with their benefits, because you still have to maintain, like my daughters, they still want that $15 for doing the dishes. So how are the consumers going to be able to really dig into these plans to make sure they're not missing out on benefits that they're going to find critical to their use next year?
Absolutely. And then there's the other piece, because we've talked a lot about the financial part of things so far on the podcast, but there's also the aspect of risk adjustment model, and they're pulling back a number of codes, over 2,000 codes this year, right? So first of all, what is the codes and what's the impact of that?
So I've read that it has a lot to do with the fact that there's too much ambiguity as it relates to codes that are being submitted for claim payment from the government. So too much leeway.
So I go to the doctors, I have something done. Medicare has a code for that,
Correct.
right? But there's too many codes or not enough clarity, which can create issues as far as billing, prior approval, all sorts of things, right?
Without a doubt. And the one you just hit on right there is key. It's been in the news a lot lately, if you've been paying attention at all, when it's really the prior approval or the pre-authorization process that Medicare Advantage plans are now going by. As a rule to keep costs down, because again, when you're looking at a claim payment from the insurance company, that's money out the door. So they want to try to minimize that if they possibly can, right?
Yes.
So as a way to do that, they try to have all of these steps in between the service you need and all of these tests you have to have in between to dictate that you do need the service indeed. Because usually the end of the line, it's a pretty expensive procedure or test you have to go through. So you have to do this litany of items that Medicare really wants to shorten that process down. There's too much time in between your doctor saying, yes, I need you to go get that, and it actually being done, and a lot of wasteful dollars being spent at the same time.
Yeah, so like if we look at the two aspects we've talked about so far today, the financial impact might not be as much last year. We'll talk a little bit more in the next segment about how that's going to affect potentially premiums and benefits, but the codes actually should be a great benefit to the consumer, right? Because the Medicare Advantage plans, they are different from original Medicare and a supplement. Medicare Advantage plans are managed care,
Correct.
right? It's not just co-pays. It's not just those types of things. It is the ability to get services. And it's one of the ways that the companies actually control costs beyond the dollars and cents, if you will. So those are the two big aspects. 3.3 right around there. We've also got the cut down of the codes, two of the big things in the final notice, how that are going to impact the consumer, which we're going to unpack a lot in the next segment.
And there's still more that we have to dive into, really. I mean, it's a
200-page document.
It's a 200-page document, and generally, this is what was weird this year. As opposed to years past, usually when that information came out, there was a lot of different sources you could go to, compare information and go, okay, I got the readout now. I can relay that on to our consumers. Well, this year, there's not as much clarity, unfortunately, right away. So as more information does become available, we will, of course, keep you in the know here at the Inside Connection. And, of course, if you ever do need help for anything that you're hearing today, or you have any Medicare question whatsoever, questions related to Penny as well, if you're under the age of 65, we do a lot of work there. So there are many different ways to contact us. Lance, give us a few ways that you think would be the most direct route to, I got a question, how do I get my answer?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost would be give us a call, right? 888-818-6334. That works really well. Also, MediConnectInsurance.com. They are able to go there, submit a ticket to start a conversation either through email. They can register for one of our seminars there. You can go to MediConnect PGH for Facebook, MediConnect Insurance on YouTube, where we have Medicare in a Minute and a lot of other things. And Sean, if somebody's just kind of cooling into MediConnect, they may have seen or heard our radio show or whatever, just tell them a little bit before the break, who is MediConnect?
We are the top-rated healthcare advisory firm in the state of Pennsylvania. And really what we feature more than anything is the fact that we want to give an unbiased education that focuses on what the consumer needs. And we learn that through building a relationship with each and every person we help through this process. So we know that it's very difficult. And as a result, and a mission statement of us moving forward is the fact that we always want to make Medicare simple. So we're going to take all the mess around in Medicare, streamline that down to the information you need individually so that you can make a clear, confident decision. And there's never a fee, right? So
That's right.
We're very proud of what we're able to offer. And again, any questions you may have, 888-818-6334.
Medicare is confusing and a little scary.
Plan B, Part B,
HMO, PPO. I feel lost.
Whether you're just starting Medicare or currently on Medicare, you're faced with critical decisions each year. Questions like, do I need a Medicare plan? Is my current coverage still my best option? Will I still be able to see my doctors? I'm Brian Breisinger with MediConnect, the area's premier independent healthcare advisory firm. We can help avoid costly pitfalls today and in the future. We can meet with you in person or over the phone. Choose an expert in your community.
MediConnect walked us through everything.
Best of all, it didn't cost us anything.
That's right. Our licensed experts can offer unbiased advice on all of your healthcare options at no cost to you.
MediConnect is a great organization.
MediConnect, bridging the healthcare gap. For no-cost advice, call 888-818-MEDI or go to MediConnectInsurance.com.
And welcome back to the Inside Connection podcast powered by MediConnect. I am Lance O'Brien alongside Sean Horn. Sean, we've been talking about the CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the governing body of Medicare and Medicaid, and their final ruling that came out this year, which is a precursor of how the plans are going to build out their products and offerings to the consumer. So what we want to do in this segment is we just want to do a quick recap of the impact, and then we want to talk about the specific things that we could see and how it would affect the consumer.
So what we're going to see coming for 2024, that's really what this ruling is all about, by the way. This is basically setting the landscape for the following plan year. So the ruling that just came out this past week is going to impact 2024. And, we're looking at an increase in spending by the government to the tune of about 3.32%.
Okay.
Which is down drastically from 8.5% like it was last year. On top of that, we're seeing some rule changes that I think are going to long-term be good for the consumers. But in the short term, of course, anytime there's some sort of, choppiness in the waters when it comes to how things are going to navigate moving forward, there's usually, you have to allow a little bit of room for error, unfortunately. So when we're talking about over 2,000 claim codes being taken off of Medicare, so, in order to remove a little bit of, ambiguity and provide more clarity on the type of services that need to be had. So that right there is just as big as what the spend is going to be. But again, talking about that spend, I want to begin the conversation there because that's where people are going to feel it first.
Right.
So talk a little bit about what we could be looking at related to just a 3.32% increase versus what did the insurance companies want in order to remain flatline, if you will.
Yeah. So at first look, we know it's less than last year, right? But it's still an increase, right?
It
So
is.
in our mind, it's like, okay, they're getting more money. So maybe premiums will go down, maybe benefits will increase or co-pays will go down, right? And that could certainly happen, right? But the insurance companies generally in the final ruling, because there's a lot of risk ratio stuff that we're not going to get into because we don't want to make it complicated this
Right.
morning, right? Our goal is to make things simple all the time. But at the end of the day, they're hoping for about 4% on their end in the final ruling because it helps mitigate some of their risk. So this fell a little bit short. So initial thought process is we're probably going to see a Part B increase, right? Not necessarily a direct impact of the final notice, but certainly a part of the whole cake batter, if you will, right? So Part B is most likely going to go up. I think beyond the final notice, there's other reasons to believe that, right? Generally, it stays the same or goes up. Last year, when it was decreased, the first time in over a decade, we saw a decrease. So that's the first thing. The money coming out of people's checks is likely to increase in the coming year.
And I think really what the government is going to try to do a little bit is make themselves whole, if you will. So we had a massive Social Security increase last year. And even the year before, there was a pretty big one as well. Probably going to see another one due to inflation still continuing on. But with these increases in Social Security payments, I have to agree with you where I do believe we're going to see a little bit of an uptick in Part B premium, again, just to try to get the government to make themselves whole once again.
Right. And what we said is, so CMS is the governing body. So there is oversight on how all of this works. So what that means is the private insurance companies that offer these advantage plans, they can't just go out willy-nilly, if you will, and create the plans that is going to be of the greatest benefit to them. They have to hit certain markers, right? Which there's other things that come into play, star ratings and other things that really work into it. But from a purely financial perspective, now what the carriers are going to do is they're going to take this final notice increase and they're going to build their plan structures.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to submit bids and they're going to say, this is what we can offer based on what we're getting, based off of what can be underwritten. And then CMS will come back and ask them to do recalculation of their bid, right, to change their bid, or they'll accept their bid as we march towards August, where most things at that point in time in August are pretty much set in stone outside of a minor tweak. So then they can print it, get it all rolled out and ready to go for October 1st.
Yeah, and October 1st is when we can finally start talking about what the plans are going to look like detail by detail. But until then, we know what they're going to be in September. We just can't say anything by law. But so we start talking about the Part B premium. That's one area where we can see some impact. I imagine when it comes to premiums, personally speaking, I think that we're going to, see some flatlining or potentially some decreases there simply because over the last 5 years, the majority of Medicare Advantage plans have moved closer to zero than they have $100 a month, if you will.
That's correct.
I imagine we're going to continue to see more and more of that. And the plans that do have premium, you might see a slight uptick there, a little bit of an increase. But again, it's all going to balance out on how the benefits work at the same time. And what are some benefit changes that people should really be watching as the year goes on and start getting the notices on how their plan may change for next year?
Yeah, so again, in the benefit space where we've seen the biggest changes over the last few years are in the services that people either use the most or want the most.
Correct. Yep.
Right. So the ones that they use the most, that would be primary care physician copays, specialist copays, hospital copays, right? We've seen a lot of movement in these areas. And then physical therapy, big movement this last year, and what the plans were offering there. And then the benefits they want, which is the extras, right? Because original Medicare only covers what's medically necessary. So it doesn't cover prescription drugs, right? Which for some people that's medically necessary, right? But it doesn't cover dental, vision, and hearing unless it's medically necessary, right? So again, if I'm a diabetic and I have, eye issues, some of that's going to be covered, but my routine eye exam, my dental visit for my cleanings, that stuff is not covered. Where in these Advantage plans, we've seen a lot of increase or add-ons in those benefits. So those are where we're going to see probably some give and some take. And honestly, for me, Sean, there's an increase. It's not really what I think the insurance companies were hoping for, but what we've seen trending over the last 5 years in the Medicare Advantage place, I actually think things for the most part are going to stay pretty static.
And let's talk about that for a minute, though, because that's a great word. But we've been at this a while.
Yes.
I've been active for 12 years. You've been very busy for a long period of time as well. So when it comes to the advice and how the market works, we generally see a few types of years as it relates to the Medicare market. Some of them are going to be a boom. Some of them are going to be stagnant, and some of them are going to be a net loss, where unfortunately people just pay more and they don't get the benefits that they really want or that they're used to. And thankfully, we haven't seen too much of that lately,
right?
Which is surprising considering that Medicare's in the news all the time now, saying that there's a date where it's going to expire, if you will. So it's kind of interesting to see that as time has gone on, still benefits seem to be getting more beneficial and price points are coming down a little bit. But stagnant is good.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it this way. If you're on Medicare and you're watching today, or maybe your parents are on Medicare, right, and they haven't reviewed their plan, or you haven't reviewed your plan in the last 3 years, you need to review your plan, right?
Big mistake.
Yes, the changes industry-wide in that 36-month period have been pretty significant, right? There are reduction in premium, expansion of benefit at a significant level, right? If you reviewed your plan last year, I don't know if it's going to be as crucial to review your plan this year unless you personally have had significant prescription changes, or your annual notice of changes shows big changes. So again, static is what I really think. Not a lot of change. Now, again, we're speculating. We'll be able to know more, but we're speculating based on our expertise and history of doing this and what we've seen in the industry. So if you haven't reviewed in 3 years, definitely think you need to, right? This year, year over year, I think you may be safe, but look at your own health issue, your own needs, and that could determine what you want to do.
So I'm going to break from the fold a little bit here and differ with you just a little bit.
That's fine. That's good.
And where I think we may see, I agree with you for the most part, but as we've seen in Western Pennsylvania and across the entire state, really, at a wide scale, is the fact that these insurance companies, you'll get a couple that separate themselves from the pack on a yearly basis. So even though the increase was only 3.32%, there will be companies who see this as an opportunity to go after market share.
Yeah,
and
definitely could see that.
And I think those who are aggressive will end up winning, because a lot of the times what you'll end up seeing as well is the drug plan changes you were talking about. From 1 year to the next, we see drastic movement there.
Right.
1 year it'll be your prescription you're on will be a tier 3. The next year it could be a tier 1 on a different company. That would save you a lot of money if that ends up happening. And we've seen it time after time.
Yes.
Even if you're somebody who did change last year and you've been happy with the plan, it still might be to your benefit to just do a once over and make sure. Or, of course, if you're not utilizing all the benefits within your plan, it's still worthwhile to, kind of know how that works. But so I see that happening, but also the idea that these the processing and these codes are going to disappear. I think as a net, this is a big win for the industry, and I mean by the consumers, because there's been way too much vague and not enough clarity related to what needs to happen related to your care so that you can get better faster. This has been a major sticking point for the government over the last year, where they really harnessed in a lot of these insurance companies saying, you're making it way too hard for your members to get better faster. So I think that is going to be something that will inevitably probably save us billions of dollars long haul, which again, something that could go towards better benefits, keeping the program alive longer, a whole host of issues that could really be fixed if we could tune that up.
Absolutely. And I think the overall good news is it's still an increase.
Correct.
Right. They're moving towards eliminating waste, right, to really improve the over. And I used the word a few minutes ago, speculation, right? Good news is as each month goes on, we're going to get more concrete. And for us, that's what we're passionate about, is once all of these 70 some plans are approved and finalized, we really want to walk people through this is what it's going to look like. Because again, as everything is rising in cost around us, we want to make sure that people are getting the best health coverage that they can. So yes, I do agree with you from the standpoint annual reviews are really important. If you haven't reviewed in a while, you really need to. So Sean, how can people connect with us here at MediConnect?
Live advisors standing by almost around the clock. 888-818-6334, MediConnectInsurance.com. You can also check us out on Facebook at MediConnect PGH. And we also have a YouTube channel, MediConnect Insurance. Many different ways to connect, and we'll make sure we keep you in the loop.